Well, good afternoon, everyone. I see it's already 4 after. We've got a pretty small group today, but I think we're going to go through the presentation as we would any other month. And we are recording this, so we'll be able to post it online after the fact. Starting to be curious how our newsletters are going out and making sure everyone's getting them these last couple of weeks. I know we had to postpone this from last week, however, as we were hosting a virtual housing summit in coordination with HUD. So I think just moving it back a week may have thought folks thought it was canceled for the month and then we rejoin us in the next month. But we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who are new here, which may not be any of you, my name is Tony Walters, Executive Director here at NAIHC. And each month we go through a legislative committee update, kind of an open call for all of our members to join us, ask questions, and provide feedback and learn some of the new things that have happened in the month. As I was preparing the slide deck or updating the slide deck, I realized quite a bit's happened since our last call with the new appropriations, new budget, some announcements on ERAP and others. So we'll go through those real quick because it's such a small call. Feel free to interrupt, ask questions, get suggestions, whatever you want to talk about. We can have this be more of an informal call here today, but I'll just go through the slides as we go because we are recording, as I said, and we'll be able to post this online for those who have missed the call today. And we'll jump right in. Feel free to say hi or use the chat as well. I kind of have that open and we can look through that for questions or comments there, say hi to one another, or announce which tribe you may be working with or where you're coming to the meeting from. And I'll just start with our typical agenda. I flipped the order for appropriations and NAHASDA updates just because the appropriation cycle has been much more in the news this past month. So I thought I would just jump in there. So FY22 full appropriations were passed on March 10th. So right after our monthly legislative call last month, the full year appropriations were passed, and first major increases for NAHASDA programs in a number of years. I would say probably since the ARA increases back in 2010, if you take away ARA and even the COVID funds, which are more supplemental packages for kind of crisis years, these are the first substantial gains to the NAHASDA programs probably since it was enacted back in the late 90s. So for this year, the IHBG formula fund increased to 772 million, up from 647. So that's almost a 20% jump. For the IHBG competitive grant, that increased to 150 million, which it's been at 100 million since it began a few years ago. And then just a week or two after that, the budget proposal, the screen here shows how this compares to the Biden administration's proposal for FY22, and you can see it lined up pretty closely. The Biden administration did request $1 billion for tribal housing. They had a little bit different breakdown. They wanted a little bit more for competitive grants, and I know the budget asked for some flexibility to focus on climate adaptation issues. But here, Congress, when they were going through their steps of appropriating for the full year, they didn't take that recommendation and instead increased the IHBG formula up to 772 and took the competitive grants at 150, which is still an increase for that program as well. So a lot of good funding here for tribes. As I said, it's some of the first big gains that we've seen overall. So 20% there and 50% for the competitive grant under NAHASDA. So next slide here. This is just a chart of comparing all of the funds that tribes received last year to this year. Again, IHBG formula jumped from 647 to 772. You see the competitive block grant jumped up. TTA, ICDBG had a very small increase. Other programs are pretty static. Title VI, Section 184. Native Hawaiian block grant did get a big jump though from being probably underfunded for many years as well. So they got a good increase to 20 million in FY22 appropriations. So that's all good news for kind of all of our stakeholders and look forward to hearing how that's being implemented on the ground. If that new funding is helpful, of course, I think we all know it is and needed for our tribal communities, but happy to hear what tribes are able to do with some of the increased resources that they're receiving for the first time this year. And here we go to the next slide for FY23. The budget cycle has already begun. Of course, there's really no budget cycles anymore. All just kind of runs into each other as Congress is often slow to enact full year appropriations. But the Biden administration did release its budget on March 28th at the end of March, into the last month. And again, they're asking for $1 billion for tribal housing. They kind of mirrored what Congress provided in the recent weeks for the FY22 by copying that 772 million to continue that level of funding for the IHBG formula, 150 million for the competitive grants, and then 70 million, 7 million, and 1 for the other programs that we've talked about, ICDBG, TTA, and Title VI loan guarantees. So what's next for that? That budget gets released to Congress and the public. Congress will hold a bunch of hearings over that over the next few months, appropriations committees and others. And what we're hearing, I think, is that subcommittees, appropriation subcommittees and committees will begin kind of the bigger hearings in June and July, where they actually talk about the numbers, but they'll have hearings starting already from now until then, just inviting people to speak on budget requests, on budget needs, and hear from stakeholders on if this budget is appropriate for the programs that it's trying to fund. So we'll be working with our folks in Congress and allies on the Hill just to make sure that tribal housing is once again included. But again, great news kind of across the board for this kind of increase in tribal housing funding over this past year. One additional item to note in the Biden administration budget was that they actually asked for more funding for the USDA 502 demonstration pilot program that's been going on in South Dakota for the 502 single family home loan program. That program got about $2 million, I believe, a couple of years ago to provide funds from the USDA 502 loan program to native CDFIs. So the native CDFI could do that lending on the ground in tribal communities rather than relying on the USDA staff, and had a lot of success. So this budget request is the first budget request that's asked for more money for that program. And it's asked for about 20 million. It's kind of ambiguous, what the breakdown of that is. Part of that's just budget authority to carry out a volume of loans over time. I think it's about 7 million in actual funding to put out new loans to that program and provide that funding to native CDFIs. But we'll be working with that sponsors for that program, those stakeholders who've been utilizing that demonstration pilot to great success. I had a great call with Joanna Dono. I don't see her on the list here today, but I know she's engaging a lot of our housing partners, native and non-native alike, to get some support for this 502 relending project. And we'll continue that both on the authorization side with the bill that we'll talk about here in a second, and now the funding side when we see it included in the administration's budget. So that's, again, another bit of good news there for that type of program for tribal housing and homeownership initiatives going on, particularly in Great Plains. But I think with that level of funding, it could be expanded to other tribal communities as well, which I think is everyone's goal, is to make these programs accessible to tribes across the country. So with the 1 billion in appropriations for FY23, that's in addition to what you see on the slide here. I think we had the slide up last month. $4 billion in tribal housing funding over these past 2 COVID years. 1.6 billion in annual normal appropriations is what tribes have been seeing year to year for almost a decade. But on top of that, there was a lot of supplemental funds over these past 2 years for tribal housing programs, 650 for IHBG, 380 for ICDBG. And then as we talk about here a little bit, the emergency rental assistance and homeowner assistance fund programs as well, running out of Treasury. So lots of resources going to tribes in these past 2 years. And we're seeing, as we get back to, I guess, more of a normal year-to-year appropriation level, we see a great increase there for tribal housing. So hopefully that's good momentum going forward, and we'll be able to keep those gains and make even more gains in the years to come. We all know the IHBG program has been underfunded since it was enacted under NAHASA in '96. So happy to see some growth there, and we'll work with our stakeholder partners on the Hill and federal agencies to make sure we continue to see gains for those programs. I'll transition here real quick to the NAHASA reauthorization. Not a lot of news here either. I think we've seen this slide before. There's a Senate Bill S-2264 is a normal NAHASA reauthorization bill that we've talked about for years and years. And then obviously for these calls, we've talked a lot about it in the last few months. So you see the key provisions. Won't necessarily go into a lot of the details there, but generally it's just some technical fixes to NAHASA, and more importantly, it's the reauthorization for 10 years to that program. So we don't have to kind of work under this uncertainty that's been caused by NAHASA expiring from time to time. It's been expired since 2013. So getting this reauthorization bill passed, it's almost been 10 years now. Will be 10 years if we can't get it done this Congress. So a lot of work here to do in the next few months to try to get this bill across the finish line. We are seeing some progress there as well. We got a new co-sponsor in the last month or two as well. I think I added that to this slide, but we can talk about some progress there. I think in prior months calls, we talked about how this bill did get passed out of the full Senate as part of the NDAA back in December. The NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, is an annual bill that Congress almost always passes. So it's one of those bills that everyone looks to attach things to get their priority enacted into law as well. So that's why NAHASA was targeting this bill and back in December. And that's why the Senate was able to get it on. We've got a lot of champions on the Senate side right now on both sides of the aisle. So able to get NAHASA added to that Senate bill. It fell out though, as the House was considering NDAA, and as they try to come to an agreement from the House and the Senate what can get passed in that bill. NAHASA had to drop out, unfortunately, but still some progress there. Progress on the Senate Committee for Indian Affairs side as well. That bill did get reported out finally back in November, right before this last month's call that we had for this legislative committee call. And it got passed out by voice vote, which means everyone on the committee is supportive, or just didn't have a recorded vote, but did pass out unanimously with a voice vote. Next step, increasing the sponsor count and working with the committee staff and members to identify other bills to add NAHASA to. NDAA will again have to be passed this year and FY22 or FY23. I forget the number of the bill, which year it associates with each calendar year, but it does get passed each year. So that'll be a target as always, but we're going to look for other avenues to pass NAHASA as well. I had a conversation with Indian Affairs Committee staff last week and try to get some more information from them on strategy moving forward on what other vehicles they're targeting, so we can make sure we're doing the outreach to members appropriately to say, we want to attach NAHASA to this bill, and here's why, and here's the background on NAHASA. But a lot of folks are very familiar with NAHASA, so it's usually easy conversations. It's just a matter of, is the larger vehicle, the right fit for a tribal housing bill? When these larger bills, usually don't have much to do with either tribe or housing specifically, but certainly want to find those hooks so can attach things like NAHASA too. So we'll continue that work as well moving forward. Just a slide here on the House bill. We talk about this each month, but no updates here. This is the House version of the NAHASA bill. It's a little bit different. It doesn't have any co-sponsors still, and there were a couple issues with the bill that we testified to back in August of last year. You can see them on the slide at the bottom. Largely just appropriation levels in this bill, in this authorization for NAHASA, were just starting too low. We've been asking for more funds for NAHASA programs for years, and the authorization levels under this bill would actually have capped appropriations for NAHASA at a much lower level than we would like to see. So that was the main issue with the House bill, House version of NAHASA. There was some language in there targeting some specific number of tribes, and it doesn't have those tribe support. So it's usually something that we would not support as well until all the tribes are no longer concerned with provisions that they may be targeted by. So a lot of work there on the House bill, but there's really no expectation of movement of this version of NAHASA moving forward right now. And we're really focusing our efforts on the Senate side and getting that bill across the finish line there. Jump to the next slide. Got some other NAHASA bill. We talk about this. This is just kind of the larger national policy bill that's been introduced in both chambers, House and the Senate. This is more of a Democratic policy statement bill, kind of their dream list of housing priorities across the country, not just tribal, but that housing bill on that side does reauthorize NAHASA again for 10 years and has some pretty large jump for appropriations or authorization in the first year of NAHASA. And here again, we see that bill would also give tribes back access to Section 8 housing voucher program. So that's something that we know a lot of our members have been asking about in recent years. So we like to see that get into these bills. Again, this bill is not likely to pass in its current form, but a lot of these provisions could get pulled out and added to other bills that are actually moving and making progress through the Senate and the House. So we'll keep talking with folks about this bill as well, and particularly the tribal housing provisions that we see. Other housing bills, we'll go real quick and then I'll open up for questions. HUD-VASH, still no specific singular HUD-VASH bill, but it is included in all the NAHASA efforts, both on the House and the Senate. So if we were able to get NAHASA across the finish line and get it attached to any moving vehicle moving forward, we would expect HUD-VASH to be part of that conversation as well. One of the bigger updates, I think, is just this Native American Rural Home Ownership Improvement Act. This is S2092. This is a bill that is part of the 502 relending project as well. I think I've seen Joanna join us here on this call, and I mentioned earlier that she was leading a call with a bunch of other stakeholders, both tribal and non-tribal stakeholders in the housing space, and getting a lot of groups to support and kind of work on a strategy on how we can get this bill enacted and passed. Certainly have a great ally and championing both Senators Smith and Rounds from Minnesota and South Dakota, which is leading this bill, leading the subcommittee that this bill got referred to. So a lot of, I guess, anticipation and optimism that this bill can actually get included in the package as well. This is a smaller bill. It would provide $50 million for that 502 relending project, make it a permanent project at the USDA, and really get tribes and native CDFIs that inclusiveness in that program that we haven't seen tribal communities get just through the USDA implementation of 502. So a lot of great progress here. And again, really appreciate all the work and support that the main primary stakeholders have put in on this, and those participating in that pilot project out of South Dakota, a little bit of North Dakota. So really want to give them the shout out there and the work that they've done. And Joanna, I don't know if you want to add any specific comments. I know we're going to have a couple more conversations in the next couple of weeks about right strategy. I mentioned earlier that this was in the budget request as well, and you have been kind of rounding folks up to learn what's the best route to take on getting funding included for the next fiscal year and the next appropriations, and still make progress on this underlying authorization bill too. But a lot of good work there being undertaken, and just want to open the floor up to see if you had any other comments to add about it.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks for including this in the update. I mean, the fact that it was included in the president's recommended budget for appropriations at a different level, he recommended it at 20.8 million. That's great news. It also, just another update since you and I last spoke, is that there were some recommendations going to appropriators, to Senator Leahy's staff, and they did include our request for $50 million in appropriations. So it's getting some traction on in messages that are getting to the appropriators, which is great. And the only other thing I would add is that we really are trying to get more co-sponsors, especially in the Senate. And so if anyone, especially for states that have strong native CDFIs that are doing housing lending, this is an opportunity for them to access capital. So if you are having discussions with your senators and think that, whether or not they have a CDFI in your state or not, a native CDFI in your state or not, if they are interested in supporting more access to capital for native homeownership, they would be good candidates to be co-sponsors, and would be happy to provide you with whatever information you needed to make that ask of your senator or congressman, because there's both versions are exactly alike.
I know we were discussing a one-pager that your folks put together too. We can send that out to the group. I don't know if there's been any updates in the last couple of days. I know it might have been updated after our last discussion, but we can send that around. I know we're working with the Native CDFI Network, since they're the primary beneficiaries of that, getting the funds routed through the Native CDFIs to get to homeowners and tribal communities. So I know they're working on that end as well, getting those groups and Native CDFIs to be advocates on that bill as well. So let us know. Let us keep letting us know how we can be helpful in this. And like I said earlier on the call about the budget appropriation cycle, a lot of those hearings are coming up at the end of May, beginning of June, on the THUD appropes, ag appropes for this particular bill, and then the larger appropriations committees as a whole. Those hearings will be happening in kind of May and June timeframe. And a lot of letters are being sent kind of between members, asking and urging their colleagues to support certain things. So we want to get involved in that effort. And I think that's what we talked a little bit about on the last call. So as we learn a little bit more about what our specific plans are, we'll broaden this out to our tribal housing network as well, and make sure that they can engage in a good way moving forward too. So thanks for all your work on that, and happy to keep working on it.
Thanks, Teddy.
And just on the authorization piece, again, on the slide there, you can see there were some hearings held already back in July last year and January this year. So it's been on a lot of people's radars as a topic to make some progress on. Everyone wants to make sure that they're working for their constituents, and particularly in that subcommittee there on the Senate Banking Committee, a lot of great constituents on the tribal housing side and native CDFI side that those senators are really prioritizing and wanting to get some bills passed and make some progress on. So we're going to keep leveraging that interest and engagement by those senators, and hopefully we can get this included. They got a good track record as well as getting tribal housing provisions enacted into law. We've seen over the last couple of years, so we'll keep working on that. Just keep going to the next slide here. The last bill, I think, and not a lot of updates on this one, the Trust Land Homeownership Act, S3381. Talked with Senator Thune's office a couple of times on this over the last month or so. I don't think there's a lot of progress or new updates. They did have a hearing on this back in February where they had a BIA witness come in and talk about this, and actually kind of dominated that hearing, just the questions about this process at the BIA. And this is the mortgage approval process and documentation, title status reports, things like that that are needed by both federal agencies and lenders that are operating in mortgage processes on tribal trust lands. So this bill would help expedite that by holding kind of BIA's feet to the fire, so to speak, and keeping on deadlines that they need to meet. And it's in their own policies and regulations as well, but or guidebook, I believe it's mortgage guidebook at the BIA. But this would put those timelines into statute, into law, to make folks at the BIA comply with those timeframes. So this bill, hopefully another kind of small bill that we think could have a good impact on homeownership and tribal communities. And we'll keep working on this bill as well. So I'll stop there. That's kind of the legislative update. The next few slides are going to talk more about the administrative side, some of the things that have already been enacted, other activities at our federal partners. So I'll stop there and just see if there's any questions from the group on the legislative front or appropriations side.
Tony, I also just wanted to add one other kind of cool update on the veterans work. In South Dakota, I've talked about on these calls the work with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs on the Native American Direct Loan Program. So Senator Rounds requested a GAO study 2 years ago, and it looks like that's going to be released next week on April 19th. So heads up for those who are following the Native NADL loans reform. So that is coming out, and Senator Rounds is working on legislation that he hopes to introduce before the end, like before summer starts. So I think by late May. So so there's some great movement there as well.
Great, thanks, Joanna. Before this call, I was looking for some update on the GAO side, and I didn't see anything when I Google searched that. The last thing I saw was a report from 2002, and I bet it's going to have pretty much the same discussion, unfortunately, for a lot of us. Probably the same discussion, same recommendations to VA on how to improve that program. But
I hope not. I hope not. But we just found out yesterday, actually this morning, Senator Round's staff emailed saying, hey, GAO says next week.
Great.
So if I see it, I'll send it your way.
Sounds good. And we'll be sure to share that once we get it through our newsletter and for this next call, for the next monthly call here as well. But again, Senator Rounds has been really great on some of these tribal housing issues these past few years. So I certainly want to continue working with them and supporting all their work, and just this effort here, getting kind of holding other agencies to the feet to the fire again, trying to make sure that program's working as well as it can. Some years we've seen that the VA home loan program not do very many loans at all in a given year. So we want to make sure that, one, they're given the tools to be successful on the agency side, but on the opposite side, we want to make sure tribes are fully aware of how to connect those dots and get their tribal veterans that are living in tribal communities accessible to that program and get them more home ownership opportunities through these federal programs like that. So thanks again, Joanna, for working on that one. Out of the Dakotas again, a lot of things start there and branch out, of course. So thanks again for your work there on that. I think I may have jumped ahead on some of these slides. Maybe it's just this one. So the HUD, we'll talk about some of the administrative grants and things moving forward. Not a lot of updates, unfortunately, and oddly enough, I have kind of weekly calls with check-ins with HUD ONAP on Thursdays, and it's after this. So maybe I should kind of flip that moving in the future and try to get those updates sooner, or schedule this one later in the afternoon for folks and see what new updates there are. But these kind of list the grants that have been out there from HUD ONAP for the last 3 to 6 months, kind of status or progress, and some of the new funding that's coming out soon. And here we have FY21, any community development block grant under ARP. All of those funds have been awarded. These were included under the American Rescue Plan, $280 million for those grants. That's all been awarded out. But we're still waiting, I believe, on the FY21 annual ICBG awards and the FY21 ICBG competitive awards. Both of those deadlines were a few months back, and we're still waiting, I think, to see what some of those awards are released. Hopefully we get some information soon. It's possible I get an update here later today on some of the one new grant that we do see, and HUD ONAP has kind of tried to promote, is this new demonstration program at HUD, youth homelessness issues. It's going to be a new grant that's going out to 25 grantees or communities, $72 million as part of that demonstration program, and tribes are eligible. I know we talk a lot about other HUD programs and tribes not always having eligibility, but this particular program does have eligibility for tribes. I think there's holding out of that 25 communities, a sub portion of that, not necessarily for tribes, but for rural communities in particular, which many tribes will fall under. So they are trying to make sure there's some diversity in who's getting these grants to have positive impacts against youth homelessness in these communities. So look out for that grant if you haven't already seen it. The deadline not coming up soon, but June 28th, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions on the tribal side because this will be a new type of grant that's accessible this year. As we learn of any training materials or webinars that HUD puts on, we'll share that with our through our newsletters and through these calls as well. But just want to make sure folks are aware of this new grant program out of HUD that tribes are eligible for. Tribe HUD-VASH expansion, that was a new NOFA as well for expansion tribes that closed back in January. I don't think we've seen update on those awards yet either, but I'll check in with HUD on some of those issues as well. We'd like to see that program be able to get to more tribal communities. We know it started at 26. We've added a few since then. This was the second round to add a couple more tribal communities to that program. So always want to make sure being able to expand that program as much as we can. And that's on the administrative side, while we're also kind of working on the legislative side to get HUD-VASH authorized permanently as well for tribal communities. Other HUD activities recently and upcoming, virtual HUD ONAP Housing Summit. So we hosted this last week, is why we delayed this call to today, April 6th and 7th, both afternoon sessions. Had over 500 participants, so great turnout for that virtual event last week. It was all recorded. It is available online. I think the links for the online site may first be limited to those who actually registered for the event live, but we certainly want to make that accessible to everyone who couldn't attend those events or who didn't register. We want to make those videos available. So I think we're working on that. So be on the lookout through our newsletters and things like that to get some information. Had 4 kind of really great breakout panels. Actually, maybe 6. I think it was 6 breakout panels, and then other discussions as well from HUD officials, Heidi Frechette, of course, and many of the other regional administrators for HUD ONAP offices. All providing updates and kind of success stories and best practices that they've seen in their regions. And panels were all tribally driven. So it was a lot of tribal housing directors, housing professionals on the tribal side, explaining some of the things that they've been able to do over these past couple of years. And it was both HUD programs, ERA as well. So a lot of great content there. So if you didn't catch that, it will all be posted online for folks to see moving forward. One other update here from HUD is the Tribal Intergovernmental Advisory Council. This was been in the Federal Register once or twice over this past year. It actually started way back in 2016 or so, trying to get this propped up. But now we made some progress again. It kind of died down for 4 or 5 years after it was first announced. But here, renewed effort to get this established and get people set on this council and have it move forward. Nominations for this are due, I believe, May 31st, so end of next month. I believe the council is going to be made of 2 tribal members per ONAP region. So there's 6 ONAP regions, 3 at-large members as well on the council. And there are 2-year terms, but I believe it's staggered. So if anyone who gets or half the nominees who are accepted onto the council from this first deadline, they'll have 3-year terms. So in the future, they can stagger that and have some continuity between council participants moving forward. But great to see some progress made on there. I know there was a consultation process kind of in writing, notice and comment period. Many tribes and tribal orgs submitted comments to HUD on that, and they're trying to take all that feedback in, and here they are making some more progress on getting actual members of that advisory council set, and so it can formally conduct business and conduct meetings in that regard. So a lot of great progress there on that side at HUD, trying to get some good feedback from tribes through setting up an advisory council like this. I think I'll stop here. The next couple slides are the Treasury programs. And I know there's some good announcements, or not some announcements on the Treasury program, but I'll stop here and see if there's any questions on any of the HUD related issues or content, or if you guys have any questions about some of the HUD programs going on. Okay. One quick thing on HUD. I got a question yesterday actually about FY22 funding. We talked about how tribal programs are getting a lot more funding, 19%, 20% increase. I haven't seen the estimates or allocations based on that new number yet. I think I got a question yesterday, and I thought it was posted on the HUD website, but that was an older year that did not have the full estimates for allocations on the IHBG formula for FY22 with this new 770 million block grant. But hopefully a lot of you out there have been in contact with your regional offices and learning that process. But if anyone has any updates, feel free to jump in or add something to the chat there about it. But we'll try to get a better update on the full year funding for this call and through our newsletter moving forward, just to make sure people are certainly up to date and up to speed on when that funding is accessible and getting out to tribes on the ground. So that's the one last note on HUD. We'll turn over to the Treasury Program Share Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Again, this program was created at the very beginning of COVID, essentially, or I guess probably 9 months in by Congress, and it gave funds to both states, localities, tribes, funding for emergency rental assistance. The deadline to use that funding is September 30th of this year, so coming up in 5 or 6 months. Tribal consultation regarding that reallocation portion was held last fall. No reallocations were supposed to happen until April. And I know there was some guidance that was released just last week, and it was talking about how that would be calculated on reallocations. And it's all based on unexpended funds and how much each program has spent within a quarter. So some calculations there, depending on how successful a tribe has been, or any grantee, really, not just tribes, how successful they've been on getting this money out the door to renters and families needing rental assistance in their communities. So we're going to try to get some more guidance, and I have a call with Treasury next week on that. Thanks, Dave. Dave just posted that guidance in the chat, so appreciate that. And I know there's some questions there, both about the amounts and how flexible Treasury will be with that. I know some tribal programs, may have started slow and have picked up in recent months, and they want to make sure that, with that, if that's their growth line of that program, they want to make sure that they're still going to have funding available in this next quarter, beginning, July, August, September, going into the end of that program, and they don't want to see that money, taken away or reallocated away from them. So we'll try to get some more clarity on that. It's difficult to guess on this program. Treasury's been a little, slow each time with any deadlines that they published in the past on things like getting funding out originally, and then now the reallocation piece. So we'll certainly try to work with them and clarify timing on any of this. I know they're trying to base some of their decisions, after the June 30 quarter ends, and that doesn't leave a lot of time for reallocation either away or to the next group. So any reallocations are meant to just go to another tribal grantee within this larger allocation for ERA. So certainly try to talk with Treasury folks and get some clarity on that moving forward. A lot of tribes have been successful in getting reallocations from states and other non-tribal programs that have been reallocated away from, and some of those programs are voluntarily giving up some of their funding under ERA to other groups within their state. So tribes have been able to take advantage of that. If you look at the guidance and some of the links on the Treasury ERA website, there are forms that you can continue to use to request additional ERA funds. And I think that it's not necessarily a rolling basis. I think there's kind of set points in time where they announce reallocations, but certainly I would encourage folks to keep using those forms until we're kind of told to stop, right? So unless others on the call have any other specific guidance on that, I would continue to just let folks know that if they need more ERA funds, that keep working with Treasury. I know there's sometimes a lag in response, but keep submitting documentation and forms and requests to HUD or Treasury, to receive reallocations there. And as we'll get through this next month or so, we'll try to get more clarity on what tribal reallocations away from one tribe to others may look like, particularly with that tight turnaround and getting all this money spent by the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th of this year. So don't have a lot of answers on that yet, but something we'll try to get more clarity on in the next week. Part of that conversation with Treasury next week is about TNTA as well, and making sure that tribes who have funds left over have received kind of any training TA that they need. I know it's been kind of ambiguous over these last few months what that looks like. If you are needing training in TA, I would encourage you to reach out to us as well. NIHC, we do have a little bit of funding that we've secured from some other non-federal partners out there to help put on training in TA to supplement what we can do with HUD funding and other sources. So if you have training needs or TA needs on either ERA or HAF, I would reach out to us. I think it's been announced in our newsletters the past couple of times, particularly on the HAF. If you go to one of our new web pages on our website, the Tribal Housing Assistance Resource Hub, I believe there's a link and a form there to request that TA as well. So I encourage you all to go there, look at our website and look at that particular web page as we got some funding there to help put on training in TA over the next few months on both ERA and HAF. Here from the slide, you can just see kind of the tribal numbers are a little lower, and I think that's no one was not expecting that. Just the way the funding was rolled out early last year, tribes ERA funding just slower to get sent out to families and individuals needing that assistance over the time, as tribes were a little bit more reluctant to put that money out the door without seeing more guidance from Treasury, which was a little bit slower on the tribal side than it was on the non-tribal side. So we want to make sure tribes have every opportunity and have all the resources they need to get those funds used in the best way. So again, if you need some help, feel free to reach out to me or us at NHC and our training and TA team as well. And like I said, I'm talking with Treasury folks tomorrow. So I'd love to hear if you have any feedback about reallocation or questions about reallocation. Happy to take that into this meeting next week with some of the Treasury folks in DC, just so they're aware of what tribal sides talking about or has questions over, and so we can all address that in the best way moving forward. So feel free to jump in here, or again ask in the chat if you got questions about anything ERA related or HAF related for that matter. The group that I'm talking with next week, I think, is working on both on the tribal side, so we want to make sure all tribal questions are out there and HUD and Treasury is aware. Sorry, I keep saying HUD. For HAF, real quick on this, we held a few trainings from NHC's perspective. I know one had some technical issues, but we did repeat it again. So there were 2 full trainings that were provided for the HAF program, and they should be posted online. If you don't have links to those and you want links to some of those HAF trainings, let us know. We can make sure we can send those out again, but they should be accessible to folks as well online. And as I mentioned, we do have some limited TNTA regarding ERA and HAF from our perspective. So you'd be asking NHC directly for that and not necessarily having to go through HUD or Treasury for any of those requests. But so if you have some specific requests to ERA or HAF, you can reach out to us directly at NHC and let us know. One thing I will say, many tribes have getting their plans approved. I don't know the number of states. States were slow to get their full HAF plans approved. The last number I got, I think, is what's still on the slide. And I think I don't have the number here. It was over 30 tribes, but that was a couple of weeks back now. So I think we're probably well further along than that on the Treasury side, getting tribal HAF plans approved. I know they're still getting some HAF plans just newly submitted. HAF was provided by law under a different bill than the ERA program. So there's not as tight a deadline so that, this can go out. Funding is available for a couple of years for this program, but certainly we want to get that assistance out to homeowners sooner rather than later as they need it now. So we're working with Treasury to make sure they're getting as much information as they can out to tribes on the HAF program. So, but if you have any questions about these 2 Treasury programs, feel free to chime in now, jump in. If I don't have an answer now, I can at least forward and raise these questions next week when I'm talking with Treasury folks and try to get responses back to that. I know both of these Treasury programs starting from scratch, a lot of work on your guys' end to get these programs up and running. So really appreciate all that work that you guys have done. And I think that's one of the reasons we continue to see gains in appropriations year to year, right? Everyone can see the work that tribes and tribal housing programs have been doing with all this new resources that have become available over 2 years, and just seeing capacities there, the need is there, the ability to get all these projects up and running. Certainly want to keep providing tribes the resources they need to keep that going. So appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. If you do have questions, feel free to let us know. We're going to keep advocating for these increased funds for mostly HUD programs, but if there's other supplemental programs, we hear in the news from time to time new COVID packages even now. So we want to make sure tribes are included in that. So if you've got questions about existing programs, just let us know and we'll make sure we can raise those issues with the right folks, whether it's on the Hill or with our federal partners. So I think that's kind of the update for today on these fronts. The last thing I have are just these NEHC forum calls that we do. So we are trying to keep these monthly calls going. I know we had to reschedule this one for this week due to the housing summit last week, but we'll go back to the first week of each month. I'll see if I got a slide just for that. I don't. So first Thursday of each month will be the legislative committee. I think we will hold this on that first Thursday of May. I know sometimes when we have an in-person conference, we'll postpone the virtual Ledge committee call in lieu of meeting in person, but I think we'll do both in May. I think there's a lot of updates going around each month. So great to have more connection and getting more information out to all of you than less. So we'll probably do both in May. So the first Thursday in May, and then we'll have another legislative committee meeting in person at our annual convention also in May, which the last slide is our annual convention slide. We have the second monthly call, which is our discussion forum. You can see some of the topics we've talked about on prior calls. Treasury been a big one. We did try to have it yesterday on the second Wednesday of each month. It had a pretty low turnout. I think, again, some of our promotion issues and making sure people are getting the information they need. So we'll have that again next month in May. And we want to focus on training in TA. So now that all these resources have been out for a couple of years, we want to make sure that NEHC in particular, and then of course we can relay this on to any of our federal partners and other stakeholders. We want to make sure all of our training and TA offerings are fulfilling what your guys' programs need in your communities and on the ground. So we think there's probably gaps out there. I know there's been gaps on HCF and ERA in the past, so we want to make sure we're identifying some of those and really being able to help us plan at NEHC. If we can't do something with federal funds, finding outside sources and resources for us to put on quality training in TA. So we want to have that discussion. A lot of great training in TA has been going out the door. And I think a lot of times some tribes just aren't aware of, what all the possible eligible training in TA items are. So we're trying to also really just promote what's actually already been done in some of our training in TA to tribes. So we want to have that discussion with groups as well. So we're going to use our monthly forum call next month in May. So this is the second Wednesday of May. So I don't have the date on the slide here. And we're going to talk about training and TA offerings. So we'll continue these calls moving forward. If there are other topics that you'd like us to discuss, you can see we talked about continuum of care, housing counseling. Happy to revisit one of those. Happy to revisit Treasury, but there's other projects or programs out there. I think we've heard recommendations of homelessness issues broader than continuum of care. And then other programs, maybe the VA programs as well. We can invite some folks from the VA or from tribes who have been successful in getting tribal veterans loans to that program. We can try to have that conversation as well and make sure people are aware. But happy to take any recommendations on any topics for those types of calls moving forward. The last slide here is really just our annual commitment. So it's coming up next month, May 16 through 19. 16 is kind of a travel day, but there are a few events, both a golf fundraiser and a service project that we're doing in conjunction with Chief Seattle Club based in Seattle. And we'll do our legislative committee meeting that first day as well. So folks traveling in the morning, they can participate in the formal meetings in the afternoon, but if folks come in over the weekend, they can also participate in the service project and or golf tournament. A lot of those will be options as you go to the registration site. The registration has been open for a while now. We are doing drawings to just get people registered. By the end of this week, there was a hotel deadline as well, just to make sure people were registering in time to get the right rates and things for hotels. So that drawing for anyone registered by April 15th. We're going to take a look at everyone who's registered by then. They'll be entered in the drawings for a few prizes that we've announced. Tuesday and Wednesday are the main content days, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm sorry, the main content days, a lot of breakouts, opening sessions. We are having the NEHC members meeting on Tuesday, starting in the morning, probably bridging over lunch a little bit based on the business that goes on at that meeting. We're going to have chair elections, resolution, voting, things like that. The Ameren members meeting starting Wednesday morning. I think they have the same kind of slate of elections as well. But really happy to see everyone in person again. We had a great conference in Vegas in December, kind of in a gap where COVID had gone kind of way down before the holidays, and then after the holidays, of course, it did come back. So we had to postpone in-person meetings again, but happy to re-engage with folks and get people out together. We know these in-person events are really the best way to do networking and share those best practices and stories and just see each other and learn from each other over a few days, having conversations, informal, just at these types of events. So really excited about this event coming up. Hope you all can attend and join us there for this annual convention that we've been putting on for years and years. Again, partnering with Ameren, and we'll continue to do that. I think in the future, we're in Seattle this year, Hawaii next year, but we're really hopeful you can join us moving forward. One thing I did forget, so I mentioned, joining back in person. One of the announcements we've heard from HUD in the last week or so is kind of resuming in-person training in TA. So we've gotten a lot of our training in TA requests over the past 2 years had to be performed virtually, of course, through Zoom meetings, even training in TA. On-site TA, I think we all would agree, is probably the best way to deliver technical assistance. You like to have some folks, on-site, in person, being able to look at all the same things and documents together rather than through a Zoom screen. So we have gotten some approvals to start doing a lot of that travel for our training in TA moving forward. But that's not to say we won't continue the virtual aspect of training in TA as well, where it's appropriate and helpful for the tribes. But as you put in requests for training TA moving forward, I think it's pretty important for you all to notate if it's something that you think needs to be done in person. I think HUD is interested in hearing that and seeing that. So when they do, create assignments and perform training in TA, we're being as mindful and responsive to the tribal requests as we can be. I see a question there in the chat about our annual convention being offered virtually or online. I think for this annual convention, most of it will be in person. So if you're unable to attend, unfortunately, I don't know that we're going to have a lot of the content streaming. We may stream the opening and closing general sessions because that's just kind of the setup of the room. I know the members' meetings themselves, I believe, are conducted in person for NEHC. And in particular, our bylaws require members' meetings to be held in person and not through technical communications, which is a subject that we'll actually discuss at that members' meeting moving forward, so we can be better prepared if something like this were to happen in the future. But for the most part, most of the content for our NEHC annual convention will be in person for that event. But be on the lookout. We'll send emails if anything changes. We may be able to stream some of the opening or closing sessions as well. So with that, I think that's the overall discussion for the day. Happy to answer any questions. Still managed to stretch this out to almost a full hour by myself here without too many folks joining us today. I know we have more people join and have more questions, but I still managed to talk for the whole hour, so I'm never too worried about that. But I'll open it up here. Any questions or comments out there? Question in the chat from Lahua, and sorry, I know you asked me this yesterday. I'm going to pull up our calendar here. She asks, is our legislative conference rescheduled? So we didn't host the legislative conference in DC back in February like we originally would in a given year. It is rescheduled for September. And I want to say the dates are the Monday, 19th and 20th for September. Sorry, I was looking at a calendar there, trying to get that pulled up. But we will hold that event in September. And that'll be in person in DC again as well. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Garrett.
Yeah, I had a administrative program question and a legislative program question. I guess if you're going to be talking to Treasury, I would just kind of state my question from yesterday and then see if anybody today here has any thoughts about for recapture of tribal ERA funds. The guidance says that it's considering that 10% admin share to be, it seems like almost like automatically obligated. And we're just wondering, and I'm wondering if other tribes that have been slow to get their programs off the ground or haven't spent that much money, if that is the case, if that's considered already obligated, if that's kind of the floor for their kind of recapture methodology going forward for Q3, like what we get to keep for Q3. And I know I asked this yesterday, and I don't know if anybody here has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, we can open up real quick if anyone else has any thoughts on that after just reading the guidance. I know, Dave and some others have been kind of constantly looking at all these guidance coming out. So, and working with a ton of tribes on this. I don't know if you've got any quick thoughts, but go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, sure. And Garrett, the way we understand it is that for purposes of obligation, they're going to try and put the tribes in as favorable a position as possible. They're going to look at your best performing quarter and assume that you can duplicate that by re-obligating the same amount of funds. So if you had a really good quarter in the last year or during the history of your program, they want to give every tribe the benefit of saying, well, we think you can duplicate your best quarter, so at the minimum we'd leave you that many funds to obligate going forward. They're really, as they've emphasized in a lot of their national calls, they're really both administratively and politically, they don't want these funds coming back to Treasury. That it's as much trouble as they've had figuring out how to get them out into Indian country. They really do not look forward trying to extract them from Indian country in any way, and also because they still want to support the program. So our impression of looking at their latest reallocation guidance, which I posted earlier, is that they're going to bend over backwards to put tribes in the best position to keep as much of that funding as possible and consider it obligated going forward. And I wouldn't be too surprised if, we can't see too much in our crystal ball, but I wouldn't be too surprised if that means a lot of tribes get past the September deadline and still have ERA funds that are considered obligated and therefore not subject to reallocation or recapture by Treasury. So if you had it, I would look to your particular tribe's best quarter and think about what you did then. And that seems to be the metric, at least that they've announced in March, that they're going to use as far as how many funds you can go. And then we had an additional question about, well, if I get a reallocation, do I get to spend 10% of that reallocation on administration? And I think that's the way Treasury is going to handle it. It's like getting a second grant, if you will, or a second smaller grant, if you will. And I believe they're going to allow people to consider 10% of that obligated. So if you were already running a program and you get a reallocation, you can earmark 10% of that reallocation to continue administration of those new funds.
Yeah, that's helpful. And we're in the position, for whatever reason, this quarter will be our first quarter. So whatever it is, it'll be
your best quarter no matter what. You're right at the top of your game, Garrett. It's all good.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we'll see on that. And I'm just wondering, if that 10% is automatically considered our best quarter, quote unquote. But I guess we'll find out. And then as far as on the legislative end, just kind of curiosity, it doesn't really impact Umatilla up here. But I remember at the December symposium, the topic of the House reauthorization bill and the parts that target those Oklahoma tribes, something about that maybe being dropped from that bill back then. It seems like, Tony, that those provisions have actually survived in the House version and are still gonna pose issues for kind of everybody else connected to Nahasda.
Yeah, so that provision you're talking about, there's some language in there about the freedmen members of the 5 tribes in Oklahoma. That language was in the bill back in the fall, August, September, when that bill was introduced and reported out of the House Financial Services Committee. And there actually hasn't been any activity on the House bill since then to really drop that out formally. So it's still technically in the bill, but I think moving forward, everyone's goal from the NHC's perspective and a lot of the stakeholders is to take that type of language out, particularly when those 5 tribes aren't in agreement with the language that's in there. So on the Senate side, where we're prioritizing a lot of our Nahasda efforts, so to speak, there's no language in there on that piece. So I think moving forward, we're trying to target bills that don't have that type of limiting language for any tribes, right? Regardless of the specific topic. And on that particular topic, we had a whole hearing on that. And I think the primary call was to address that, in a more comprehensive way outside of tribal housing, because it's not really even a housing specific issue. But you're right, and hasn't technically been dropped out of a House bill yet, but that bill hasn't made any kind of new updates or progress on its own. So there really hasn't been an opportunity to, formally take it out.
Okay, that's good to know. It's yeah, because it's not attached to housing. It's kind of an alarming strategy to take on something like that. And there was another stray bill in somewhere else that I saw that it wasn't attached to housing, but same kind of deal, but it was threatening some kind of, suspension of trust relationship with the Oklahoma tribes over the issue, and
Yeah.
just seemed kind of crazy. So thanks.
Yeah, good question there. Anything else? All right. Well, I'll try to find ways, and I probably say this every time, to get more updates out to you all rather than just these monthly calls, particularly if I've got a good conversation with Treasury folks or HUD in the next week or two with any good updates. We'll try to get those out through our newsletters and any other kind of emails or what have we that we put out. But don't hesitate to send questions our way. You don't have to wait for these calls either. If you've got questions on legislative issues, program issues, grants, things like that, feel free to reach out to us at NAHC. Look forward to answering any questions you guys have through emails over the next couple of weeks, and try to be responsive to those as best we can, and at least connect you to the right federal folks if it's an agency question, and getting you guys the answers you need. I know I've got a couple of questions from yesterday and today that we can follow up on with specific tribes as well. So be sure to feel free to remind me if you've got a question outstanding that you've wanting to get an answer for and haven't heard back from anyone at agency. Just feel free to reach out again. I'm sure we're always trying our best to get as much information as we can from all of our partners here in DC. And we want to make sure we're getting that information back out to you all. So if you've got questions, you're probably not the only one. So feel free to reach out to us and let us know. Let us know if there's information out there that we need to share with everybody. But for today, I think we'll go ahead and close the meeting down. I appreciate everyone taking their time out of their afternoon or morning for some of you today. I'm sure we'll get a better turnout next month when we're back on our regularly scheduled time on the first Thursday of May. So appreciate everyone joining us today and look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thanks, everybody.